Leaving Cert History students, this is part 2 at our look at the US economy from 1945 to 68, and we're going to have a little look at the development of the US industrial structure. So the military-industrial complex refers to the close relationship between the Department of the Defense and major corporations. The military relies on industry to supply weapons, while the defense industry gives the government contracts to arms contractors. The military and industry had very similar demands and combined to form an incredibly powerful lobby group. Corporations like Boeing made profits from contracts received from the Department of Defense. Generals and admirals benefited from increased money for the armed forces. Members of Congress gave contracts to companies in their own states, which increased employment and kept politicians popular with voters. In the early 1960s, 22 of the 50 states depended hugely on military spending. The military-industrial lobby group wanted to heighten fears about the threat of the USSR so that the government would spend more money on military defense. It was feared that this iron triangle would damage US society. For example, during the 1960s, spending on the military averaged at $40 billion a year. In 1960, Kennedy campaigned on the grounds of a missile gap between the United States and the USSR, even though there was none. Eisenhower warned about the dangers of this complex. Quote, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in a final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed." End quote. Another aspect of the development of the US industrial structure was the rise of multinational corporations. In 1945, there were over 300 mergers in manufacturing and mining. By 1969, there were over 2,000. These mergers created corporations like Johnson & Johnson and P&G. By 1955, 30% of manufacturing sales were controlled by 50 of over 300,000 manufacturing companies, which is an example of corporate capitalism. Some of these companies became multinational corporations. For example, they built and operated factories outside of the United States like Ford did. In the 1960s, there were 1,200 US companies abroad. The United States became the world's largest overseas investor. In 1950, US foreign investment was $11.8 billion, but by 1968, this had increased to $64.8 billion, and by 1978, it was $160 billion. This can be seen as a form of economic imperialism. By the 1980s, however, the level of foreign investment had halved. There were a number of reasons for the growth of multinationals. Success in the US market encouraged businesses to invest abroad. US companies had better technology than their European or Asian rivals. Improved transport and communications made it possible to control widespread corporations. It was cheaper to build a factory abroad near a foreign market than to export goods from America. The development of the EEC, the European Economic Community, provided another prosperous market. The US government insured multinationals against potential losses in unstable countries. After 1945, the dollar became the world's main currency and was accepted everywhere. Tax laws encouraged US companies to invest abroad. Foreign investment became so important to corporations that by 1976, 150 corporations admitted to being involved in bribing politicians, for example, Exxon.